Good afternoon. Welcome to this month's Arum Group webinar. As you may know, Arum is a developer and service provider for large-scale resorts, mainly located in the Iberian Peninsula. My name is Francesc Pujol. I'm the Real Estate Director in Arum Group. And today we are hosting this webinar to talk about modern resort design with a group of exceptional panelists. As we all know, this is a very specialized sector because resort development is a huge undertaking. It demands expertise in a variety of fields and requires alignment with investors, local governments, landowners, management companies, and many other stakeholders. But the fact is that when executed properly, resorts can be very successful. Said that, we are happy to present this event today and share knowledge with all of you. Let me now introduce to our outstanding panelists. First of all, Muriel Muirden. Hi, Muriel, how are you?
Hi, Francesc, I'm well, thank you.
Who doesn't know Muriel in our resort world? She will be the one leading our discussion today. Prior to joining the Scotland-based boutique hotel firm, The Web Company, she was the head of strategy of WATG, and she has worked as a consultant for public and private clients in Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Muriel is one of the world's top experts in this subject, and her global vision and extensive network of contacts make her an excellent person to address the present and the future of resort design. With all of this background, Muriel has very clear ideas about what will be important in the coming years. We'll be talking today about sustainability, wellness, real estate, golf, food and beverage trends, and other topics. Muriel has brought 3 executives with her with a lot of experience, who are working at the top of their field and can also offer more insight into specific topics. We welcome the first one, Ricardo Moreira. Hi, Ricardo.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Ricardo is a co-founder and managing director of XCO2, who has worked in delivering strong energy and sustainability solutions for multiple international projects. We also welcome John Galwin. Hi, John.
Hi, Francesc. Very glad to be here as well.
John is a Senior Vice President and Director of Planning and Landscape for WATG in London. He has worked in this company for more than 17 years and has led master planning efforts throughout Europe, Asia, Middle East, and also Africa. And finally, we welcome Josh Lidman. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Francesc. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Josh, with over 20 years of experience in the hospitality business, is the Vice President of Development of S8 Hotel and Resorts and responsible for growing Baccarat Hotels, One Hotel, and the House Hotel brands throughout the EMEA region. Thanks so much to all of you for being here today in what will be a fantastic discussion. I leave it to you now, Muriel.
Thank you, Francesc, and welcome everyone. I think a lot of our audience will know that out of adversity comes a stronger drive for innovation in our sector. The resort business is very good at bouncing back with great new ideas and finding ways to stand out from the crowd. Whether it's political turmoil, economic downturn, natural disasters, or in this case, a pandemic, we always bounce back. We're made of tough stuff. So today we're going to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. I'm hearing a lot of buzzwords: kinder travel, giving back travel, traveling with purpose, reconnection, restoration, seeking out the mystical and the authentic, healing holidays, even slower travel. And none of these trends are necessarily new, but they are on steroids following the pandemic. So I think there are some interesting changes taking place. And I want to hand over to my panel and ask them some questions and get them to identify their observations of both short-term trends coming out of the pandemic, but perhaps for our audience, more importantly, some of the longer-term trends that will influence resort design and resort operations. So let's get the show on the road. Where are you guys working? Where are the hot destinations? Where are investors feeling confident? Let's start with you, John.
Thank you, Muriel. I would say that it's kind of a tale of two cities at the moment, if you like. There's enormous giga projects emerging that, you know, if you've been watching any kind of travel and tourism news, you see that Saudi Arabia is emerging very, very fast with an enormous project. So on one hand, we have huge, complex, multifaceted destinations emerging in Saudi, and on the other, really much smaller projects. So in places like Spain and Portugal and throughout Europe, far more bespoke, attention to detail, focused, smaller projects. So on one hand, huge, and on the other, far more curated and complex.
Josh, where are you seeking out projects? Where are the hot markets?
Thank you, Muriel. Well, we're a global company, and so I'll just quickly say that the US has been really active for us over probably throughout lockdown and just bounced back most quickly. But over here in Europe, you know, it's really been investor driven, and you know, there's the southern Europe, sort of around Italy, the Iberian Peninsula has demonstrated a lot of traction. We've seen a lot of activity down there. Any place that has a very strong leisure component with a lot of international visitation, that's clearly because of COVID. It's bounced back most quickly, as any of us, you know, knows when we were forced to stay at home and lockdown, and the first time we get a trip with the family, or even with our spouses or significant others, we're going to go someplace for the weekend, or a retreat, just to get away and have a bit of sun and sea, ideally. So we're seeing a lot of that interest coming out of the major investors, whether it's private equity or smaller family offices. So, along the Algarve, Costa del Sol, Mallorca, Ibiza, Sardinia, and then, Italy in particular, we've seen a lot of activity.
And Ricardo, what are your observations on geography?
Well, Muriel, I would echo what John said about Saudi and the Middle East. That's certainly a hot spot, and also what Josh said about the Med. So those two are certainly kind of coming back. We're seeing some activity in the Caribbean as well, which I take it is US driven. But I think most importantly for us, we have seen really Southeast Asia finally pick up after COVID. This is a region that really suffered during the pandemic. So that's actually quite exciting.
Yeah. And, Josh, is it about, I'm thinking specifically about the Mediterranean, because I think most of our audience are from Europe. Is it mainly about refurbishment, taking tired properties and turning them around and adding wow factor, or is there actually new build resorts in the pipeline?
I think there's probably some new build interest, but it pales in comparison to the appetite there is for refurbishments and conversions, either from existing hotels or from office spaces, if you're looking at some of the cities in Spain and Italy, for example. But it's kind of where we are in the cycle, and there was a lot of the investors were waiting for all this tsunami of distressed debt coming to market, but for various reasons that never came. But it didn't change the fact that there is still a significant proportion of hotels that are unbranded along the Med compared to the US, for example. And so there's a lot of opportunity to tap into that. And given this resurgence of leisure demand and the fact that a lot of these markets are getting back up to sort of pre-COVID levels quite quickly, and that there's a lot of hotel owners from some of these existing hotels that haven't done too well over the past few years. The opportunities for investors is to take over a close to distress asset and then convert it. And new builds, it's too much risk in today's market, especially with the supply chain issues we've seen around the world. And it's the development construction risk and the planning risk, especially in southern, along the Med, that can present all sorts of obstacles to, at least for private equity players who tend to have a shorter term investment horizon than some of the larger.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also less and less site opportunities and more restrictions dictated by local planning authorities. In terms of staying with you, Josh, in terms of scale and taking Saudi out of the picture, where scale is unprecedented, is it big and bold, or is it more about, as John said, boutique, highly curated, intimate resorts?
Well, I think the assets are what the assets are. There's been a recent, there's been a couple portfolios of hospitality real estate that come to the market that are some big and bold resorts that, difficult to, there's probably not too many groups out there that can operate that type of scale. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of family-owned or at least smaller group-owned assets around Europe. Maybe 5 or 10 in a portfolio. And so they tend to be somewhat smaller. And so I think there's probably more of that activity happening. Occasionally you get the great sort of 200-300 key resorts, which, in the south of Spain or Portugal or Greece. But I think there's definitely more opportunity for some sort of small to medium-sized ones. I think the trend of consumers are looking more for that intimate setting, or at least an intimate enclave within a larger resort. But I think it's all being driven by the assets that are available in the market and what investors want to do with them.
Yeah, and would you agree, Ricardo, that small is truly beautiful at the moment and much more available?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, as you said in the beginning, it's really dependent on location, because we do see more smaller and reuse of existing properties in Europe than we do in kind of new locations in the Americas and Asia, but I do think that there's an element there of reuse that is closely linked to environmental performance and growing concerns, I would say, about embodied carbon and that kind of stuff, at least from our perspective. And as the big operators start to roll out their net zero carbon targets, then certainly that is going to come to the forefront a bit more.
Well, why don't I stick with that then? Because I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about design and sustainability trends. So, Ricardo, after this dramatic summer in the Med with these record-breaking temperatures, how are you seeing developers respond in terms of design and eco strategies, and what sort of innovations are emerging that you're saying to developers, you need to think about this now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are two aspects here. There's the aspect of the asset itself, which is really related to climate change risks and mitigation of that. So portfolio owners are going to be worried about these stranded assets that are subject to issues such as energy reliability or natural disasters, and things like overheating as well, for instance, in the Med. The other aspect is really to do with how well the property performs and its impact elsewhere. So, and on that side of things, I do think that there's a number of measures that we could be putting in place, which are well known, but are not always looked at during the design process. Really looking at the climate, designing for the climate, and understanding the local vernacular as a basis. It really teaches us a lot of lessons. And using tools like environmental modeling and energy simulation as a way of shaping the design is quite key. I think there are things like there's a bit more attention being paid to within a resort villa. Which areas of the villa actually need to be air conditioned, depending on the climate, obviously. We've got a project in the Maldives where the decision was to really only air condition the sleeping area, and really make the rest of the villa much more integrated to nature and open and passively cooled. So I think those design solutions are quite interesting. But I also think there's an element there of guest experience, and I'm seeing more and more things like door contacts for guest rooms, so the air conditioning doesn't turn on when doors and windows are open, as well as education of guests and education of housekeeping in terms of energy performance.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. And John, from a landscape point of view, I mean, one of the trends we saw pre-COVID was people really starting to realize that landscape design was of equal importance to interiors because there was this sort of seamless environment. Given what we're seeing in terms of climate change and coming out of COVID, can you share some observations on trends in landscape?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Landscape, in a sense, interior design is often based on style and taste and storytelling about what you're trying to create in a certain place, right? And I think with landscape, although the same is true, there's also a growing understanding that the landscape on a wider scale has very, very big impacts on resorts. So I'll give you some really concrete examples. For example, if there are serious forest fires in an area, which obviously the Mediterranean has seen a lot this summer, the landscape can actually, if properly managed, mitigate this. So I'll give you a super concrete example again. For example, a golf course could be a fire break between a forested area and a resort that would prevent the fire from spreading. Similarly, the urban heat island effect, landscape can actually cool things down so that the temperatures don't start to soar. So I'm a strong believer that landscape actually has to, it may cost to install and it may cost to maintain, but it needs to, you need to sweat that asset. It needs to do its job on the resort. Similarly, edible gardens or, biophilic spaces for meditation. It's not just about looking out of the window at a nice landscape that looks like it might be in Spain, for example. It's about understanding and synthesizing the way that a landscape actually is working with Mother Nature and then bringing that back to the experience. And I think with that in mind, then you really create a place that people want to go to as well. And I guess, if I may just very quickly, the other point I think that's huge is this kind of mental health iceberg that's sort of lurking under our society. There've been all sorts of, sports people coming out and talking about it. And I think landscape is one of the best ways for resort owners and developers to really give people safe, creative, whatever they, might need to be, but places that embrace mental health.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And Josh, on a broader level, you have 3 really cool brands. I'm #1 fan of one hotel, and I think it shook up the industry, and I'm excited that it's coming to Europe. But Josh, on a broader platform, what design and amenity trends are you observing in the market today?
Well, I think, given that part of that question really had to do with sustainability as well, I'll start with that first and say that, we as a carbon neutral company are fully committed to, ensuring our footprint is as small as possible and will leave the world a better place than when we found it. And it's tough to do in our industry, but whether it comes from, aspects of building materials and planning around areas that we can start build these sustainability components into the concept and design, through working with Ricardo and John's companies, all the way through to guest activities. And, for example, in our guest room floors at our Treehouse Hotel here in London, we have filtered water stations, and don't have any plastic on site. And so you're encouraged to have your own bottles and fill up. And so there's a whole sort of from very early on in concept all the way through to customer engagement. There's there's a lot of touch points that sustainability can be wrapped into hospitality. And I just think from a design perspective, to use John's expression earlier, it is a tale of 2 cities. On the one hand, we're, with COVID has created all this fear of being around other people. And so people are continuing to look for these intimate spaces, privacy, getting away from large groups, not sitting in big cavernous spaces and having little nooks and crannies where, in relaxing places that make you feel like you're at home. On the flip side, people are also desperate to get out there, and we're social creatures and socialize and go out and eat and drink and throw COVID aside and let's just get on with our lives and have a great time. And so there's this sort of this sort of mix of emotions, and I think it'll be a successful hotel or resort that's able to provide both of those experiences. That social vibe around the food and beverage scene, but also creating some smaller, intimate, cozy, private spaces that you don't feel like someone's breathing COVID on you next to you.
I'm going to move on to another topic. One thing we've observed coming out of COVID is a fairly chronic shortage of labour in the hospitality industry. Some of it's geographic specific, but it's still fairly widespread. It seems during our lockdown, people rethought what they wanted to do with their lives. They found different ways to earn a living, and hotels were reopening and struggling to find chefs and restaurant staff and housekeeping staff. And it's shaken the sector up a bit. I've sat in many workshops with John over the years, and I've always tried to encourage on larger resorts for developers to disaggregate their amenity and their food and beverage, create multiple energy centers around the site that are innovative and fun, because that will mean that you'll retain client interest and you'll increase your spends, and you won't have, you know, lots of people pouring out of the resort to spend money elsewhere. That isn't such a great strategy when you're short on staff, because we're going to need staff to multitask, to be flexible, to seamlessly move between departments. And if those departments require a Formula One racing golf buggy to get there, it's not too efficient. So perhaps in design terms, you know, in Europe, for example, where, and in North America, where we have these labor shortages, someone's just said, there aren't these shortages in Asia, and I know that, but in Europe and North America, there certainly are. Maybe we have to be more compact again. Maybe we need to design more flexible spaces that are more fluid for staff to move between. I don't know, it's a dilemma. John, any observations on how design can mitigate what may be an ongoing challenge to get staff in certain geographic markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you framed the question very well. Some of it is super low tech. I can't say that we're now, you know, designing with robotics to make all of these problems go away. Then, you know, there's a legion of robots to solve this. It's not working like that. I mean, some of it is incredibly low tech. So, for example, in the Greek islands, the waiters become maintenance men in the off season. So they paint the resorts, and, you know, at least they're then kept on site to do a more varied job. Because I'm even more worried about the seasonality, particularly in places like Greece, which have such a strong polarization in seasons. And then, you know, I guess the idea of building more means you have to pay to develop more as well. So I think there's a lot to be said about the efficiency of this kind of resort as a microcosm of little villages. So, you know, where you have, as you would say, Muriel, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, all within the resort. And I think that gives the kind of authentic experience that people are looking for, rather than vast overblown spaces that need to be, you know, manned or staffed 24/7. I think it's an incredibly difficult thing, but as I said, I think it's the seasonality that kind of polarizes things even more. But building more will obviously create more bottom line costs for developers. So keep it small, keep it compact, and keep it diverse and interesting and organic, and let things start to happen around the sort of happenings. I would say, very interestingly, we once had a project in southern Spain, and the client hired such beautiful housekeeping staff that they all ended up as models in the marketing photos. So there can be some very, very clever reuse of staff in that way as well. But certainly a difficult question. I'm sorry, I don't have a silver bullet for that one.
No, and I mean, you know, we could go down the philosophical rabbit hole of, did we have this coming as an industry? And, you know, did we neglect the education and training of staff? But just a final thought, for those on remote locations or on islands where you have to house the staff, I think the time we give in resort design to creating lifestyle, aspirational lifestyle for our guests, in equal measure, we now need to think about aspirational lifestyle for our staff who are living on site. And I think a lot more design thoughtfulness needs to go into creating staff accommodation and staff amenities and a lifestyle for staff. But it's a tricky situation. It's got a lot of chats coming through on it, and localization of labor, education, great debate, but I better move on.
Muriel, if I can just say, interject as well, just a last little quick comment. It's probably pretty obvious, but one's place of employment takes up a significant portion of a person's lifestyle, life, and if they have to go into a job every day that they're just doing it purely for the paycheck, and the setting is not very exciting, they're not looking forward to coming to work, their fellow employees aren't happy, senior management and leadership aren't really setting the tone for creating a positive place where everyone, they're sort of just barely hitting what needs to be hit from resort guest experience, but also from employee experience. Then people are going to start tuning out, and you're going to have attrition and lose out in labor. But if you create an exciting place where the guests are enthralled, it's authentic, it's relevant, it's today, it's tomorrow, your guests love it, and that will translate to the employees being happy to be in an environment. I just don't think that's rocket science at all, but I think a lot of it comes to leadership, a lot of it comes to having the right concept and not just providing a box with beds in it for people to stay in. That's not really inspiring for anyone on the guest or the employee side. So but I'm sure we could talk about that all day with.
No, well said. And as I say, it's generating a lot of comments. Someone's recommended looking at Six Senses and some of their housing and things. So I'm going to move on to the F factor, and by that I mean food. And again, pre-COVID, I think was one of the most innovative periods for resort food and beverage. We had a lot of developers and operators completely relooking at how they did their on-site food and beverage, a lot more innovation, a lot more localization. Josh, share some trends you see in food and beverage. Is all-day dining dead in the water, or will it come back to life?
I do not think all-day dining is dead in the water. I think the term all-day dining is probably dead in the water. I think that, I could speak from our experience and the success that we've seen in these, in these periods where lockdown was lifted for a period of time and then locked down again. Food and beverage was the first to take off, and it wasn't everywhere. It was places that, were focused very much on the local community, as much, if not more so, than overnight guests. And if you can stay relevant and authentic enough for locals to come to your food and beverage outlets, then the guests are going to follow, because who doesn't want to stay in a more authentic environment that the locals like? You're sort of on the inside. And we've actually seen that across the board at our hotels, be it in Miami or here in London, New York. I don't think any of those trends that you mentioned pre-COVID, Muriel, are going anywhere. I think they're still here. In fact, there's probably been, it's even more sort of on steroids now, and focusing on sustainability and localization of products. And our restaurant at our hotel here at Treehouse in London, there's sort of a 30-kilometer-mile radius restriction for sourcing of ingredients. And I think guests are expecting a lot of this now, especially now that we're seeing all these climate issues happening. So I think sustainability in the food supply is critical. I think there's a big trend toward healthier eating, and we've probably been saying that for a long time. But veganism, having vegan menus, is the norm now. Or having vegan options, heavy options, not just one dish of alfalfa sprouts or something. It's getting creative and having healthy, vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian options on the menu, and at a high quality level, is becoming it's the norm, and it's important. It's important for I think for hotels to attract to this growing trend, what consumers are looking for. I think third-party concepts. I think there's a reluctance, a lot of operators, to engage with third parties. We have no problem doing that, teaming up with various concepts that are out there to build a bit of brand enhancement, affiliation with an established chef or an established restaurant or bar concept in one place can add value back and forth between the hotel and the F&B outlet itself. So I think we're seeing, more of that. But no, I think a lot of these trends that you mentioned, are definitely here to stay. If anything, it's moving a little bit more into the healthier direction as well.
And Ricardo, are you seeing a lot more resort developers actually grasping, the issue and having agricultural activities and initiatives going on site or proximate off-site in order to hit this localization?
Yeah, definitely. There's certainly growing interest in agritourism. I think either as a main identity of the resort or just an element, one of the elements of the scheme. I mean, in that sense, Six Senses did have that, I would say, decades ago, but now it's more widespread, and it's really interesting because it adds to the guest experience. And in urban settings, we're starting to see even interest in hydroponics to provide, green leaves and herbs. He usually meets a very small proportion of the food needs, or the general requirements, but there's something exciting about that because it does provide a social and environmental benefit at the same time. That is an opportunity to educate the guests. And beyond that, I think there's certainly some interesting actions on a widespread use of food waste monitoring technology, so that there's more care about what we do with that food that we grow locally, as well as with the waste itself, trying to reuse it for other purposes, like using on-site food digesters, sometimes even for energy generation. So those things that 20 or 15 years ago we would be talking about as some nice ideas that nobody's implemented is now becoming a reality.
Can I chip in there, Muriel, and disagree with Ricardo? I agree with most of what you say, Ricardo, but I personally find the notion of robots growing hydroponic tomatoes or herbs in an urban situation something that's probably quite interesting as an exhibition thing, but it's more than likely not the future of food for our society, and certainly not in our sector. I think that there's a return to the authentic, if you like, creating, as you said, but anaerobic digestion and creating topsoil and actually understanding that agriculture and the food that we grow is something that relates to the earth that we stand on, not to, as I said, robots in greenhouses and things like that. And I think it's important to understand aquaponics and hydroponics and aeroponics and all of those kind of things. But I think that could easily be greenwashed by a city hotel as a kind of, we've got it all covered, because, you probably haven't. Mushrooms in the basement, absolutely, but not the other stuff.
I'm going to push back on John here now on Ricardo's behalf, because, I spent, from our perspective at our hotels, we try to grow where we can. And that's a big part of, I think, what people expect to see where you can is, where are you sourcing your ingredients from? And if you can say that, well, we've got beehives on the roof, we're making our own honey, and we've got our own garden. But I was actually at Soho Farmhouse a few weeks ago, and their whole garden, their whole chef's garden, which is massive, is a big part of an experience. And I think there's very much where you can do that. Maybe not.
I agree with you totally, Josh, but I'm talking about aquaponics and aeroponics and science. I think that the beautiful thing about Soho Farmhouse is its ability to function as a hotel within a farm. I think that's fabulous. I love that. I worry a little bit about the high-tech solutions that Ricardo was talking about.
I think there's an interesting discussion about what is valid and what's not. But I think there's a broader discussion here about a tendency towards in a way self-sufficiency, not full self-sufficiency, but driving towards it. And it's certainly made us more aware here in the UK, given the last few weeks and months that we've had. And for those outside of the UK that are not aware, there are shortages right now that you could blame it on various different political and societal aspects. But the point is that I do think that, and it goes in line with a thinking of sustainability that, in terms of kind of food miles or even the social benefits of activities on the food chain to be more localized. I think that's really a tendency that obviously it's not applicable everywhere. There will be remote places that will have to import their food, but it is a tendency we're seeing.
Well, thank you. I thought we were on the verge of a very good spat there, and I love it.
I stepped back, Muriel. I
managed to kind of
step
steer
back from the
that
precipice.
Well, look, every good conference or webinar, as we do now, should have someone falling on their sword and admitting they got it a bit wrong. And that's going to be me. I stood up at a golf conference, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, time passes, and I declared that cycling was the new golf, that the trend for golf was passing. It wasn't appealing to the younger demographic. It took too long. Golf operations were too stuffy. They were too slow to change. And people were looking for more high-octane outdoor activities. Well, I had a conversation with a resort operator, one of the world's best-known golf resorts, just earlier today on something completely different. And we were exchanging information on how our respective golf operations were doing. Well, rounds are up, green fees are up, pro shop sales are up, membership is up. Golf seems to have done a revival, so maybe golf is the new golf. John, React, is this here to stay, or is it a reconnection, short-term change?
Okay, so to me, the fundamentals of golf as an outdoor activity are, you know, fabulous in terms of a way to connect across generations, a way to get out and enjoy the outdoors. And so I understand why certain courses will be seeing a huge uplift. But again, it comes back to what I was saying about landscape having to justify its position in the queue. So it shouldn't be jostling with real estate. You shouldn't be deciding between whether to put prime real estate on a particular part of site or golf. To me, if we're talking about new build or re-energizing, the golf has to be doing what it, you know, a landscape function. So I'll give you a few examples. For example, a fire break, as I said earlier, a big drainage corridor. We saw these horrific flooding in Northern Europe. If golf is correctly laid out, it can really help to alleviate flooding on a resort. So in that sense, golf is a great land use. What it shouldn't be is turning deserts green or using 1 million liters of water a day in, you know, environmentally fragile places, in my opinion. So if you're talking about a famous resort in Germany or in Scotland or, you know, one of these places, absolutely makes sense. The rain is good, you can collect it, you can irrigate with it, and golf is part of the fabric of the resort. If you're talking about putting golf somewhere where you're then, as a result, not following sustainable principles, then I take great issue with it.
Yeah. But Ricardo, respond. I mean, it's my understanding that golf gets a very bad rap on the sustainability agenda, yet there's been great advancement in terms of grasses and ways to irrigate. Is there any trends that you can share?
Yeah, I think it does get a bad rep, but at the same time, to a great extent, it does deserve, because the solutions are there, but they're just not widespread enough. You know, there are things like, you know, using treated sewage effluent or wastewater, treated wastewater for irrigation. Those things are well established now, right? So any major development with golf would be considering that, probably implementing that. But this typically doesn't really meet the whole water demand of a golf course. In fact, it's a small proportion. So less widespread practices, like, as you mentioned, you know, some species of grass that have been artificially developed to consume less water, saltwater irrigation type of landscape, you know, that kind of stuff, leak detection, and as well as kind of, you know, having enough valves in your irrigation network so you can close off portions of your network if there is a leak. More advanced technology-based weather monitoring control as well for irrigation. All those things, if looked at collectively, could really present some pretty big savings for golf. But the fact of the matter is that it's not always used. And as John said, I think there are some locations, especially in the middle of the desert, that you will struggle with getting to kind of a net water use. And I think that's really what we're missing. We're missing that measurement and quantification of that water impact, the water performance of those developments, and to communicate it clearly. I think certification, and there's specific certification for goals, sometimes can disguise poor performance in some areas, whereas I think we do need to treat our consumers, our guests, as educated consumers, and really provide them with the facts, and say, this is our consumption, this is a typical consumption for a golf course. In comparison, our consumption for our resort is this much, so people can really understand the impact of golf. And perhaps then we'll have less of a bad rap for golf.
And it's not only golf, Muriel. I mean, if you think about swimming pools on resorts, obviously these are chlorinated. Essentially, you kill all of the life in a swimming pool to make it safe for people to swim in. We've done a lot of work recently on rainwater swimming lagoons. And again, there's something very nice and very holistic about the notion of saying, well, we've got a rainwater swimming lagoon in our project. And again, the chemistry of it is completely different. Instead of working against nature, you start working with nature. And so you purify the water using reeds and phragmites and all sorts of things like this. And then you generate this incredible rainwater swimming experience, which comes right back to a product like Josh's, where you're actually selling that as part of your ethos. It's authentically part of the experience. So I'm very excited by golf if it's in the right place, using the right principles, paspalum grasses that Ricardo mentioned, amazing irrigation. Yes, treated sewage effluent, they can be edible, they can be fire breaks. But again, when you're doing it on the wrong side. All of these things need to work nicely with Mother Nature. She always knows better than us. And I think if you take her on, you're going to lose every time.
And there's an element too of really the economic incentive in addition to the credibility aspect of it. The economic incentive, water resources need to be priced properly to reflect really their environmental impact. And in a lot of places, water is subsidized, and as a result of energy being subsidized as well. So there's an aspect there of really making sure that people are paying for the impact they have.
Thanks, guys. And Josh, I'm going to change tack again. Let's talk about residential. In particular, let's talk about branded residential. Is this core to your resort developments, Josh, and what trends are you observing?
It depends, Muriel. It's definitely a strong part of resort development, and in some cases urban as well, of having a portion of inventory as branded residences of some sort, either part of inventory, rental pool or not. I think the higher you go, the more challenging it is to pull off a hotel without branded residences, just because of the cost of development and the fact that a lot of these sort of, if we're talking 5+ ultra luxury, hotels that, there's an expectation that you're going to have a lot of land and a lot of privacy and a lot of that in a prime location. And so a lot of that takes up a lot of space and ergo a lot of money. And so it's kind of hard to have a 80-key hotel, 60-key hotel, 100-key hotel stack up purely on the rooms and food and beverage or spa side. So you kind of need to have some other cash flow in there, at least up front in the, for the initial, the project launch, the initial investor owner. But I think it's still an important part. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but again, it really depends. And you could have a big block hotel in a super prime area of the Costa del Sol or in Greece that, in a prime area and don't have a lot of space, and it's very efficient and it works really well. You're always going to get more money, as you know, Muriel, on selling off some real estate and getting some upfront cash. But I think, there's a lot of new players in the branded residence space. Obviously, you have your standbys who've been doing it for a long time, and it tended to have been at the upper end of the market, but it's starting to slide down a little bit. And on our Treehouse brand, we're looking at branded residences, and and I think branded residence doesn't have to be, a villa, an apartment. We're looking at, glamping units that you can sell. You're looking, and again, urban or resort. I think it's a pretty critical part of the business, again, depending on the particular asset you're talking about, but it's here to stay. And it's becoming more diverse.
Yeah. What is the value out of the branded residence? So, I mean, is it, I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, residential has for many years been a prerequisite to financial feasibility, particularly on larger resorts. But branded residential, there's a, you know, the brands proclaim that there is, you know, a huge premium over non-branded residential, but also we know they cost more. You know, the spec is higher. They have to be, the spec has to be compatible with the hotel, and that in turn, you know, brings with it additional costs. So what do you see the advantages of, you know, a one hotel branded residential as opposed to having just a series of villas scattered around the resort that are unbranded?
I think it comes down to the desirability of the project itself, right? Of the resort itself. Is this a place that guests want to stay and they want to visit more than once? Do they want to own a piece of this and be able to, you know what, this is great. Every time I come here, I'm relaxed. It's exactly what I like. Food and beverage, the restaurants are great. My kids like it. My in-laws like it. My grandparents, or, you know, where people want to come back. And so I think they need to buy into the resort. But at the same time, there's trust with certain brands. But, you know, there's a lot of brands that people don't know about. So I think there's a bit of the traditional trust that you'd have from a brand, but also, you know, this the creation of a concept that people genuinely want to own and be part of. Now, does that translate into a premium over traditional real estate? I would say yes, because you're getting more for, you're kind of buying into a lifestyle, into an experience where you want to be around whatever it is that resort or hotel has to offer, or because, you know, even in an urban setting, you come to New York or London, you know, all the time, and you might as well have your own place, and you love this particular location and this hotel, and everything's sorted for you. I'm not quite so sure it's that much more expensive. You're comparing like to like. I think if you're, you know, if you're selling a luxury hotel for, you know, let's say an apartment, a one-bedroom apartment in a luxury branded hotel versus a similar quality and similar location, I don't know if it's a huge amount of premium. There are going to be some additional costs, but I think a lot of those can be passed through as ad hoc costs, you know, for an owner, whether you want housekeeping, room service, engineering, maintenance, all that stuff. So I think, listen, I think people at the end of the day need to buy into what's on offer, and if that's something that they want to have, that they want that to be a permanent-ish part of their lives.
Yeah, I think it's the motivation of the buyer. You know, if you have a pragmatic buyer who goes, hey, I'm only going to use it 30 days a year, and, you know, it's costing me a lot of money, then a structured rental pool managed by a hotel brand with a big booking engine kind of makes sense. Maybe less so if it's a lifestyle or a semi-retirement home. But that's up to the buyers, what they're buying into. John, are you still seeing on your master plans branded residential?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, before the downturn, before COVID, everyone was talking about branded residential. So let's go back 10, 15 years ago. Branded residential in Europe was a somewhat untested, very North American concept. And I think that really recently, it's evolved in two ways. Firstly, it's very lifestyle related now. So it's not necessarily the more, I would say, beige brands that people are gravitating towards. When I say people, I'm talking about developers. It's more of the, you know, Josh style projects, because that starts to engage with people's emotional side, rather than maybe, you know, they'll pay a little bit extra and they will get this incredible lifestyle that they want to be part of, this ecological or you know, regenerative lifestyle that everyone seems to be looking for now. And it's gone to the point now where sometimes there's so much branded, there is almost no hotel anymore. So we start looking at branded residential with a very minimal hotel. So the number of branded units has gone up and up and up steadily. And then you start looking at actually the role of the hotel in all of this. So yes, it becomes a real estate play. Obviously, all of our projects are complex real estate plays. We don't really just do, in inverted commas, hotels anymore. There's this real estate piece. And I think that the branded is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more, if you like, sexy with these incredible eco brands. Those would be the two things. And yeah, the number of units, we used to, as you will know, always try and keep the number down and manageable. And it really is starting to become a large part of the inventory these days.
Just to build on that side, I think there's also what consumers are looking for, been, especially, in the light of COVID, and we think this is going to stay, is sort of, and we said this a little bit earlier, having their own space, whether it's villas or apartments, self-contained space, self-catered within a resort context, so you don't have to be around the masses. And these standalone products end up, these are something that people can buy into and say, well, I'd like to own my space at this particular resort. But it seems to continue with this growing trend of wanting to have your own sense of privacy, hence the whole, the continued surgence in Airbnb and similar product. So I think, this is probably just further supporting everything that you've been saying over the years, Muriel, about the importance of having branded, having privately owned real estate within a resort setting.
Yeah. Okay, let us look at wellness now. Again, I think for a very long time, we've all known that it's not about 2 treatment rooms in the basement. It's about a holistic approach that stretches over the whole resort. But John, what are you seeing happening in wellness? And is it indoor or outdoor spaces? What's happening?
So for me, the biggest evolution, particularly since COVID, is something I mentioned earlier. It's the whole notion of mental health and how that is now something that we're talking about, and how that relates particularly to landscape spaces, which also speaks to what Josh was saying about people need somewhere to go and feel safe. I don't believe the answer is plastic pods, that you kind of have with their own air supply, like a diving bell on the terrace. I believe the answer is to be surrounded by beautiful, luxuriant planting that cleans the air. And, it should be effortless, this kind of stuff. And I think that mental health fits into the same idea that if you're really working with very biophilic environments, which again, I know that Josh's products really embrace the biophilic. If you really work with this biophilia, there's a kind of latent connection that mankind has with nature that starts to play out about how the wellness plays through mental health as well. So I think that things like, color therapy gardens and fragrant gardens and barefoot biophilic gardens and all of these kind of things are just, it's very, very easy to get them into this kind of authentic, I don't like using the word authentic, but I've just used it, to create this kind of destination that's certainly, of the place and very much using native plants. And, you can have gardens for ink so that people can paint, and all of these kind of medicinal gardens, physic gardens, sculpture gardens. And I think, as I said, that really starts to play to wellness, not just being the spa in the basement, as you say, but permeating from the tap, the triple filtered carbon filter that you have in your bedroom. So you're drinking, instead of out of a plastic bottle, you're drinking clean, beautiful, triple filtered water all the way through to the rainwater shower outside your room. And then, as I said, the landscape spaces, and then the spa itself, which is now obviously growing and becoming more and more complex with every new project that we do, particularly at the luxury end of the scale.
Yeah. And Josh, what role does wellness play within your brand portfolio in a resort context?
I mean, wellness is critical. I mean, we, as a company, nature and sustainability are sort of core tent poles that we sort of revolve around, and wellness is a critical part of a guest experience, and it doesn't have to be necessarily in a spa. It's like John said, this is really like, this is a lifestyle, and this is trend starting to live, to have better, to live, have enhanced well-being, whether it's through activity, through sporting, type of activities, or spa, or, the traditional treatments. But it's also about engaging with nature, being surrounded by nature, things that are naturally therapeutic. It's about the type of foods you consume. So we're seeing a trend with our guests seeking this out and willing to pay a premium for it, saying, to be surrounded by the biophilia that John was mentioning earlier, when you're walking into a hotel lobby and the restaurants and sitting down, the type of ingredients and the person can understand that the food they're eating is, a lot of it been sourced from nearby, and it's this whole sense of well-being that encompasses more than just going and getting a a massage, but there, again, as John pointed out, there's as changes in technology and the experiences are growing around these spa and wellness treatments, there are other, there's a sort of a constantly evolving trend of what that means, and I'd say maybe we're moving away from a traditional treatment room and more into getting people outside into the gardens and meditating and trying to have a little bit more 360 well-rounded wellness experience.
Yeah. So I see we have only a few minutes to go, so I think it would be great to each of us to share an inspirational project we've visited recently or we know is underway that has that degree of pixie dust and innovation that we're looking for. So let's start with you, Ricardo. Tell us an inspirational project.
It's actually a project on the making right now. We're working on it. A project in Belize where we're using prefabrication as a way of reducing local waste and local pollution. It's a very sensitive area, and it also helps us with the precision of construction, therefore the energy efficiency. So it's a model that's been discussed on a few projects, but it's really the first time that we're seeing it implemented on site. So that's kind of a bit of a novelty. Behind the scenes, you've got all of the good things, the homework being done, like good energy management technology being implemented, some metering, intuitive room controls, good design based on kind of passive design principles. But I think this prefabrication aspect is somewhat of a novelty that I think has a lot to offer.
Thanks. We're running low on time. John, can I ask you to give us in a few sound bites an inspirational project?
Yeah, we're working on something, of course, confidential in Southern Europe, in Spain at the moment, and we set ourselves the task of making it Europe's most biophilic resort. So we even looked at changing the nomenclature. So instead of having a porte cochere, we've got a wildflower glade. Instead of having an all-day dining, we have a campfire. So looking at these notions of actually connecting by changing the nomenclature and changing the way that we look at the system of the resort, really trying to pull through some design ideas. So this will end up hopefully being something that will change the game and make this very important connection with nature that I was talking about earlier on a really major scale. Josh?
Thank you, John. Josh?
I think our one hotel in Paris is it's under development. It's being done in conjunction with an established local developer and the city of Paris as part of this broader mixed-use project behind Gare d'Austerlitz on the 13th. And the hotel is being designed by Kengo Kuma. I'm sure many people have heard of him. I urge you to go Google it and read about it. It's fabulous looking. It looks like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and lots of uses of wood and greenery and glass, and it's really sort of meant to connect the sky down with the earth, but have all these sort of public gardens and terraces, and meant to be as part of the sort of regenerative project in that side of Paris, but also with a lot of the greenery meant to be sort of the new green lungs of this side of Paris. So again, focusing on the sustainable component that we were talking about earlier.
Perfect. Well, mine inspirational project is the Newton Somerset, which is a new boutique resort, and fabulous restoration and great innovation, and just an amazing place to be. But the appearance of Francesca means that we need to sum up and close up. And I think I probably only have time to sum up in about a sentence. So I think we're saying small is beautiful. I think we're saying that sustainability is rising up the agenda and, will help to steer design. I think wellness and mental well-being has risen up the agenda in resorts, and we see a role for resorts to play in restoration of our well-being. Geographically, there still seems to be a lot of activity, but a lot of it is going to be in taking tired properties, turning them around, sprinkling the pixie dust, and away we go. And I think in terms of food, it's about localization and how do you facilitate that through landscape or adjacent development. Residential is here to stay on resorts. In fact, the numbers are growing in terms of the balance with room count, which always used to be very sort of strictly controlled. And branded residential is adding a new added value, particularly when you have pragmatic buyers, which are anticipated to come back in the market. That does not do justice to the wisdom these gentlemen have shared with us, but I am aware we're now 2 minutes over time, so I better shut up and hand it back to Francesca.
Okay, thanks a lot, Muriel. Thanks a lot, John, Josh, Ricardo, for all the knowledge you have shared with us today. I also want to thank all the attendants that have been here with us for an hour. I really hope it has been an interesting webinar for all of us. I know there are some questions that we have not answered. We will send the answers to the people who have been connected. And well, finally, just saying that be aware of our next webinar, and we will really appreciate you can send us any suggestions about future topics. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.